Hello and welcome to another tutorial in mechanics. In this lecture, I will teach you the concept of the contact force between surfaces. If you are an A-level student taking mathematics or physics as one of your subjects, then you might want to take this lecture because I will demystify the concept of the contact force for you. Besides, I've got very good news at the end of this video for those taking mathematics at advanced level. So stay with me until the end. So by the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify the two components of the contact force acting in various situations. You should be able to describe the magnitude and direction of components of the contact forces acting in each situation. So let's go straight to the first situation. In this situation, I've got a block. It may be a block of wood or maybe a brick lying on a rough surface. One of the forces that the block experiences is its own weight, acting vertically downwards. The surface exerts an equal force on the block vertically upwards. So these two forces are equal in magnitude. In this lecture, we are more interested in the frictional force which is exerted on the block by the surface. Now practically, if we begin to pull this block, let's begin to apply a small amount of force on the block and see what happens. So we begin to pull the block. Do you see what has just happened? Let's repeat. So we begin to pull the block. This is the force. You have immediately seen that as soon as we begin to pull the block, another force comes in here and it starts to increase in magnitude in the opposite direction, like that, until when it reaches a certain value, or when the pulling force reaches a certain value, the block starts to move with, of course, a constant speed. As it is doing right now, it is moving to the right with a constant speed. Now, where does this other force come from? This force we are exerting on the block. Let's say maybe we tie a rope on the block and we pull it horizontally. So we start with a small amount of force. We start pulling the block to the right. But you find that the block does not start to move immediately. The reason why it does not start to move immediately is because the surface exerts an opposite force on the block in this direction. That force is called frictional force. Frictional force. In fact, it is referred to as the frictional component of the contact force. But before we talk about the contact force, let's get this point clear. That as soon as we start pulling the block to the right, we pull it with an increasing force. The force is going to increase in magnitude to the right. So the surface starts to pull the block with an equal force in the opposite direction. So if the pulling force increases, then the friction force is going to increase. A time comes when the friction force cannot increase any longer. It has reached its maximum value. Then if we increase the pulling force just slightly, then the block will start to move. So at that point, we say that the block is in a state of equilibrium, referred to as limiting equilibrium. Limiting equilibrium. Now, let's look at the forces which are exerted on this block by this surface. There are two of them. The normal component of the contact force, this R, because this R is the force exerted on the block by the surface vertically upwards. And because it is making 90 degrees with the surface, it's referred to as the normal component of the contact force. The other force which the surface exerts on the block is, of course, this frictional force. It's referred to as the frictional component of the contact force. Notice that word, frictional component of the contact force. normal component of the contact force. That means these two forces, this one and this one, are actually components of a force we refer to as the contact force. These two surfaces are in contact, and therefore this block exerts a force on the surface. Similarly, according to Newton's third law, the surface itself will exert an equal force on the block. Now, what is the direction of this force? The force that this block exerts on the surface is in this direction. Just follow this arrow. It is in this direction. How do I know that it is in this direction? It is because it is the sum of this force and this force. Because W is the amount of force that the block exerts on the surface, and F is the other force that the block exerts on the surface. So if we add this force and this force, we'll find that it will be in this direction. We shall see this in the next diagram in a minute. Now, when it comes to the block, there are two forces that the surface exerts on the block. One of them is the frictional component of the contact force. The other one is the normal component of the contact force. Again, the force that the surface exerts on the block is again in this direction, like that. Let's move over to the next situation. In this situation, I've got a car. I want us to concentrate on the contact forces between the tire and the surface of the road. Now the car has started to move to the right. Now what makes it to move must be the force that the tire is exerting on the road at this particular point. So let's concentrate at this point. One of the forces that the tire exerts on the road is, of course, the weight of the car. The weight of the car. Of course, the weight of the car is distributed among the four tires, but I want to consider a quarter of that weight, which is supported by this tire. So the weight of the car is the force that this tire exerts on the ground vertically downward. Again, according to Newton's third law, the surface of the road exerts an equal force on the tire vertically upwards. The surface of the road exerts an equal force on the tire vertically upwards. So this force and this force, they are equal in magnitude but opposite in direction. Now, what is the other force that acts at this point? Let's look at it. Look at this tire. This tire is tending to push the road backwards. So this yellow arrow pointing to the left must be the force that the tire exerts on the road surface backwards, like that. The road surface, on the other hand, reacts and pushes the car forward, pushes the tire forward with this force here, the red one. So this red force and this red force are the two components of the contact force that the road exerts on the car. This is very important, so I'm going to repeat it. These two forces, this one and this one, they are the vertical and the horizontal component of the contact force that the road exerts on the tire. Similarly, this force and this force are the components of the horizontal and the vertical component of the contact force that the tire exerts on the road surface. Of course, we can go right ahead and add this force onto this one. So we can go right ahead, add this force onto this force, and in order to do that, we will draw a rectangle at this particular point and then draw a line from this point all the way to this point. It will be the sum of this force and this force. In fact, it is obtained by sliding the force which is here, which is the normal component of the contact force, all the way to this point. If you add this frictional force, because this is the frictional force, onto the normal component of the contact force, we are going to get this contact force here. Similarly, when it comes to the forces exerted by the tire on the road, there is this force plus this force giving us this force. Of course, this force here is equal in magnitude to this other force, and the two are in exact opposite directions, like this. So this is the contact force that the road exerts on the tire, or that the road exerts on the car, while this force is the amount of the contact force that the tire exerts on the road. This one is very, very important for you to be able to understand. The contact force is one of the concepts taught in mechanics. In mechanics, we always deal with the frictional component and the normal component of the contact force. So if you are an advanced level student taking mathematics and want to learn more about concepts in mechanics, then I'm pleased to inform you that I've put together 40 video lectures in form of a course. This course is hosted at udemy.com. The link below this video will take you directly to the course. There are also some free videos once you are on that page. Just click on the link right away.